Good morning, Texoma. I'm Ashley Fitzwater. Thanks for joining us. This morning, we're taking an inside look at stories you saw only on 6. We're actually going behind the scenes a bit, sitting down with reporters who put these stories together that truly affect you and matter most to you and your family. And we're starting with a story that got a lot of attention. It's from Christina Myers, and it's called Sex Offender Next Room Over. And joining me now with much more on that is, of course, Christina. And we were talking about the sex offender story just now. And, you know, you spent a lot of time researching and getting to the bottom of this.
It did. You know, I sat down, I went through all 168 registered sex offenders that live here in Wichita Falls. And, you know, for what I did for it, really, I used the zip code because there's many different ways that you can search for a sex offender. You can search by name, by town in general, but I wanted to make sure I hit every single part of Wichita Falls. So I went through zip codes, found every single address, and then it was cross-referencing those addresses with every address of every single hotel or motel in Wichita Falls. So it was a lot of work, but I think worth it in the end.
Whenever you were digging, were you learning things that were surprising you along the way?
Well, I think really kind of the basis of the story is the most surprising thing. Most people, including myself, don't realize that sex offenders can register their permanent address to a hotel or a motel. So it really was just kind of an educational piece to let people know that it is allowed, and then how many people actually are registered to hotels or motels.
Can you talk a little bit about the feedback that you've received, you know, since that story first aired?
Sure. I mean, a lot of, you know, we spoke with detectives with the Registered Sex Offender Department. They were very happy that we were kind of getting the word out there. And maybe sex offenders are staying at hotels, but it's still a safe environment for you, for your kids. So they were happy with the way the story came out. And yeah, there's been some mixed reactions as far as, you know, whether or not people did want to know that at all. But it is public knowledge, so that's why we kind of felt okay letting people know exactly where they were staying.
Could you kind of narrow down maybe or try to figure out how many hours you actually put into making this story come about?
I know it was really kind of a full work day, let's say, just sitting at the computer and literally going through, getting those addresses, again, cross-referencing with other addresses. That was just one day itself. And then you have, of course, you know, going out. We went door to door at these hotels and talking to different people, talking to the manager of the hotel, then going to the sex offender detectives. So really, all in all, probably a week total.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long process.
And 8-hour days, by the way. When she says a work day, you know, it's not just an hour or two here or there.
Right.
So, you know, one more way, of course, News Channel 6 is always looking out for you and your family and really researching and getting to the bottom. So that way we can bring you the news that you need and the news that matters most to you. So, Christina, thanks for the insight to that. And, you know, in case you missed it the first time, here's another look at that story.
The next time you check into a hotel, think about who could be in the next room. It could be a sex offender.
They have to provide us proof of residence, either a receipt, a contract, a lease agreement. They'll call in with each address.
Registering with a permanent address as a hotel is perfectly legal. Offenders whose victims were under 17 years old still cannot stay at hotels or motels that fall within a child safety zone. And these sex offenders also have to check in with the Wichita Falls Sex Offender Registration Department on a weekly, monthly, or annual basis.
And we do. We check at all hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, and it is random. We don't tell them we're coming. We don't give them a date and time. We just show up.
News Channel 6 used the DPS website and one by one combed through all 164 sex offenders currently registered in Wichita Falls. Of those, 10 have a home address that matches the address of a local hotel or motel. 7 of those 10 sex offenders live at the Wayfarer Motel on Central Freeway. The other 3 are split between the Econo Inn on Burke Burnett Road, the Falls Motel on Old Iowa Park Road, and the Travel Lodge on Walcott Lane.
Well, they have to go somewhere. They had to live somewhere.
We spoke with a longtime Wichita Falls motel owner who wished to remain anonymous. He's been in the business for nearly 20 years and has rented rooms to many sex offenders in his 5 motels across the city.
In your 19 years, have you ever had an issue with a sex offender?
Never.
He says he even felt safe raising his own children around the sex offenders at his hotels. Most of his customers don't stay just a night or two, but live there semi-permanently. So this manager gets to know his customers personally. And he even says he would rather rent a room to a sex offender than some other convicted criminals.
If the police give me a list, to the drug peoples, I'm not going to rent the room to the peoples.
But if it was a sex offender, you would?
Yes, for sure.
But this manager doesn't let his other guests know who may be sleeping in the next room, and legally, he doesn't have to.
That's a company's decision, but it is not the manager's requirement to notify any people checking in about sex offenders that reside on their property, because the sex offenders are listed on the public website of DPS.
We went door to door at the Travelodge asking guests if they knew nothing but a wall was separating them from a sex offender, and they were not happy.
It doesn't make me nervous. I'm pretty irritated that I was unaware. It's not something I would ever condone. Really, I don't think housing a sex offender is something that's anything moral at all.
And these two at the Wayfarer say they're considering moving after finding out a man just 2 doors down is a sex offender. They tell me they often have his child and her nieces at the house and no longer feel comfortable bringing them around. While the hotel manager we talked to says he doesn't inform guests about sex offenders, he does make an effort to give people with young children a room away from where the sex offenders are staying. The lesson here is you can't only be vigilant when it comes to your own neighborhood. You have to be aware, no matter where you are.
I think if you stay at any public, facility, you should always keep a close eye on your kids and things when you're staying in an area that you're not familiar with. But I don't think it probably puts any more risk than going to a friend's house in a neighborhood where one could be living as well.
Wow, it's an incredible look, really, into the inside behind sex offenders next door. So, Christina, we thank you for that story. But you know what? That is not the only story Texoma that she did. Spent time researching and, of course, going above and beyond to find answers. This next story even sparked, well, I guess a couple of days worth of stories. And
Yes.
It's all about the smoking ordinance in Wichita Falls.
That's right, and I'm still working on it too. It was actually surprising to me. This was coming from the north, coming down here and seeing that smoking was still allowed in public places like bars and restaurants. So that's kind of really what sparked. I just wanted to look into, when was the ordinance passed and that kind of thing. When I met with people from the health department, that's really when this story took off. They were the ones who really told me, our ordinance is out of date. It's no longer keeping residents safe. And that kind of just really, we put that information out there in the first story, and Texomans sounded off, both on our Facebook page, our poll question, everything. And so really from there, we realized we need to take this further. Obviously, Texoma wants answers on this. So we went to the mayor and asked him, how come you're not putting it on the agenda? He said that 3 counselors could get it on the agenda as well. So I reached out to all of them to see how many. And they do have 3 counselors on this current council that would support it. Then they said that the director of the health department could put it on there. So we reached out to her, Lou Kreidler. So we're really kind of trying to get this from every single angle and see, they do believe that it will be on a council agenda in this year's time. So I'll be interested to see how the vote goes.
Interesting also to see that, stepping up, doing this story, Texoma's wanting change. That these stories, really, again, it goes back to who we say we are, always looking out for you, Texoma, doing stories that matter most to you, and obviously this story matters to Texoma.
Yes, and they made it known that it mattered to them.
And what is the biggest problem most people seem to have with the current ordinance? Is that there's not a true separation?
It's really that, our ordinance was passed in 1994, amended in 2002, but there were really small changes made to it. In 2006 is when the Surgeon General came out and gave all of the information of just how bad secondhand smoke is for you. So really, our ordinance is just out of date. That's the major problem. Yes, the separate ventilation systems, the language is vague, but even that still really wouldn't be enough because of how much we know about the dangers of secondhand smoke at this point.
And you also found, taking it even another step further, that there's now third-hand smoke. Is that correct?
Yes, the research is kind of new on this, so we didn't get into it too much. And this might be a story maybe down the road. We'll see. But yeah, third-hand smoke is it's very interesting. It's once the smoke clears the air. It's the particles of smoke that are left on your clothing, in the fabric of your car. They said in appliances in your homes, if you smoke indoors, things that you wouldn't even realize can catch that smoke. And even years later, you can possibly still be having the dangerous effects of that third-hand smoke.
Wow, it is interesting. And like she said, it continues to develop. So stay with 6. We're not done with this yet, I have a feeling. But just in case you missed it the first time, here's another look at that story Christina Myers put together.
In 2006, the Surgeon General came out and said there's no safe exposure level to secondhand smoke. And the only safe exposure level is 0%.
William Carter is the program manager for Transforming Texas, and he says research shows secondhand smoke has the same effects as if you yourself were smoking.
Lung cancer is a big problem. Heart disease is a big problem. In fact, it's so big a concern that 1 out of every 10 people that die from tobacco-related causes never touched a cigarette. They're now smokers.
That means about 50,000 people who have never even touched a cigarette in their entire lives are dying from secondhand smoke exposure. There are laws in place that are supposed to protect us from exposure in certain places, but News Channel 6 has discovered the laws might not be tough enough. In Wichita Falls, City Council passed an ordinance in 1994 that prohibits smoking in restaurants unless it's done in a designated smoking area. But the health department says the language is just too vague.
Our ordinance says if you have a smoking section, it has to have its own ventilation system, but it doesn't really define what ventilation system is. It could be a fan in a window.
That's it. Just a breeze to try to keep smoke in the smoking section is all that's needed. So even if customers complain, there's not much that can be done. The Wichita Falls Wichita County Health District will come out and inspect bars and restaurants to make sure they aren't violating the rules. But Susan Morris showed us the test really isn't all that high tech.
The science has changed, and our test to check to see if the air is mixing is real basic and it's real simple.
Susan is in charge of enforcing the city's smoking ordinance. She showed us in her office the exact test used to keep bars and restaurants in compliance with the city's smoking ordinance. In a doorway, a few puffs of powder to simulate smoke shows which way the air is flowing. Since the air is coming towards us, this side would have to be the smoking section and the other side non-smoking. And if this side was non-smoking, with the smoke coming in like that, the restaurant would be in violation.
There probably are more advanced ways to test, but for our ordinance and the purpose of our ordinance, this is the way. And this meets the standard of the way our ordinance is written.
Smoking sections don't even have to be fully closed off. Open doorways are allowed.
The waiters and waitresses that walk from section to section carry it on their clothes, and you can smell it on the employees. And so they can smell, other customers can smell that tobacco, and they complain and say, well, we can smell the cigarettes.
Both Carter and Morris say in their professional health opinions our current city ordinance is not doing enough to keep residents safe, but only residents have the power to change it.
If the citizens want a different ordinance, then that's up to the citizens to talk to their representatives.
That's something where voters really have the power. If they're interested in changing the ordinance, that's where they can talk to their elected officials and encourage them to update the ordinance.
Welcome back to Inside Texoma. Once again, we are taking a look at stories you saw only on 6. Tanya De Jesus is joining us now, and her story was actually a gun story titled Texoma's Gun Capital, and she spent hours, which this is what I want you to talk about, really digging for the facts, digging for the information for this story. And, you know, can you share just a little bit more in case people missed it, even what it's about?
Absolutely. It was definitely time consuming because to find out which town was Texoma's capital, I wanted to look at the number of concealed weapon permits that were given out to Texomans in the last 5 years. So basically, I had to go to the Texas Department of Public Safety's website, and I printed out this document. This is basically a one-year report. It has all the zip codes in Texas, And basically, I had to look for every single zip code in Texoma to find out the number of permits that were given out each year. So that definitely took a lot. And then after that, I basically had to look up the number of the population in each town. So here I have my little table that I did. Everything, you know, was pretty organized. I had to be just in order to find out the amount of concealed weapons permits per capita in each town. So.
How many towns did you look at? I see 2 pages there, just line after line after line.
Yeah, 27 towns in Texoma to
Wow.
really get these results. And it took hours. It was very interesting. But once I found out the results, you know, the fun part started, and that was to really learn why so many concealed weapon permits were giving out.
Did you find anything surprising or anything that just stands out in your mind from this story?
You know, what I thought was really interesting is that the top 3 towns on the list all had something in common. The fact that they all were close to a highway and they didn't have their own police department. So I thought that was very interesting.
It is interesting to know maybe they were using it, did they say more of a self-defense, just to kind of have the...
Absolutely. They said, you know, we are our own first responders. So, you know, they wouldn't feel secure if they didn't have a way to really protect themselves in case something entered their house or anything like that.
Well, a very timely story, of course. In case you missed it the first time, here's another look at a story you will only see on 6, Texoma's gun capital.
In eastern Wilbarger County, there's a tiny town that only 130 people call home. There's a post office and a school building, but you won't find the hustle and bustle of a big city. Harold, Texas doesn't have a grocery store, it doesn't have a city government, and it doesn't even have its own law enforcement.
We are our first responders, so that's exactly what we do. We take that seriously. So those of us that live in these communities are protected. If someone breaks into our home, it's capital punishment.
In Harold, 13% of the population has a concealed weapon permit. Even teachers are allowed to carry concealed handguns in school. In fact, Harold ISD is the first school in the nation to allow this. Harold ISD Superintendent David Thweed knows the community perhaps better than anyone else. He says many people here are always ready to pull the trigger because the Wilbarger's Sheriff's Office, which is the closest law enforcement agency, is 30 minutes away. The town also sits right next to Highway 287 in a train track that has been triggering trouble.
Quite often we have passengers get off of the train, and this is not a passenger train. And so many times we'll have people that are coming through our community that are not part of our community. We don't know who they are.
70 miles away, another small town faces the same issues. Bellevue is second on our list of towns with the highest concealed weapon permits per capita in our area.
Around 360 people live right here in Bellevue, and in fact, 11% of them carry a concealed weapon. They also say it's because of security and because they grew up around them.
Bellevue resident Michael Rowland says he grew up shooting guns and hunting with his grandfather. And other people in town told me off camera that their handguns have actually been passed down from generation to generation.
All my neighbors around here, we've got guns, but we ain't going out and go killing nobody. We use them for recreation and you know, deer hunting or whatever hunting we do. It's just part of life.
And this former Wichita Falls police officer says that even though his home got broken into once and it took 45 minutes for law enforcement to get there, he's not carrying a concealed weapon because of the danger he might face in Bellevue.
When I go to a larger city, there's so much more crime in a larger city than there is around Bellevue most of the time. And I just needed protection.
A certain protection, he says, many people in rural Texas can only get from a concealed weapon. Tanya De Jesus, News Channel 6.
Welcome back to Inside Texhoma. Once again, we are talking about stories you only saw right here on News Channel 6. Joining me now at the very latest is Jack Lamson, and his story is a story you have seen in the headlines, it seems, day after day, all about guns, and specifically AR-15s. Jack?
It's a weapon that's been used in a lot of high-profile incidents. Newtown, Connecticut, Adam Lanza shot his way through the locked glass door to get in with a modified version, or rather like a cousin of the AR-15, a similar style rifle. It was the kind of rifle that was used in the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. So it's been used it's gotten a lot of publicity. And the question we wanted to answer was whether or not it deserved the negative publicity that it was getting. How did it stack up versus pistols that shoot just a higher caliber bullet? And I mean, it came down to when we went out to the shooting range, Ashley, the simplest thing was just noticing that the hole the AR-15 makes versus the hole that a .45 caliber pistol round makes is, you know, the pistol at close range does a lot more damage. So the law enforcement professionals that we spoke with the Clay County Sheriff's Office and with the Wichita County Sheriff's Office, both said that the negative reputation of the AR-15 is not deserved.
Were you surprised by anything that you found out there?
You know, I kind of was. I was expecting, I don't know what I was expecting. You know, I didn't grow up in the area. I'd been around guns, but not as much as I have been already just in a year down here in Texas. And so I wasn't really sure what to expect with the AR-15, but the most interesting thing, I think, and maybe not so much surprising, if not just interesting, is just the way that people and those law enforcement professionals treat the gun. It's about the person, the man or woman behind the gun, not even so much the gun itself or the bullet in the chamber, no matter what size it is. It's just a matter of having respect for the weapon and what it can do.
Now, what about hands-on for you? Were you able to actually get out there and fire it off?
I was right out there next to him. I figured I would leave it to the professionals. As I mentioned, you know, I grew up around them a little bit, shooting up at summer camp and actually shooting a bullet that's very similar to what the AR-15 shoots. It's a longer version of a .22 bullet. It's a .223 round, which is just a little bit longer, but, you know, like I mentioned before, not nearly as damaging. But nonetheless, I figured I would let the experts with the Wichita County Sheriff's Office and their various weapons that they actually shot with me, I figured I'd leave it up to them.
Absolutely. Now, if there was one thing you want Texhoma to walk away from with this story, what would that be?
It's that respect factor, and I think that a lot of people in Texhoma, a lot of gun owners in Texhoma, and even those who don't own a gun but know someone that does, and it's so much a part of the culture, and I think they already do respect it, but if it's something that maybe you find yourself wondering about the debate or wondering if this is a weapon that should be banned or regulated or more tightly this or more tightly that, just recognize the respect that you have to have for this weapon and for any weapon. It doesn't matter at close range, in a school, in a business, you know, up close and personal. It doesn't really matter how high a caliber the weapon is. It can still do a lot of damage in the hands of the wrong person.
Absolutely. Respect of the weapon is definitely good advice to walk away with. Well, Jack, thank you for your insight to this. And, you know, just in case you missed that story the first time, here's another look at up close and personal.
The military's M16, law enforcement's M4, and the civilian AR-15. They're all similar-looking guns used for different purposes. The optional fully automatic M16 is without a doubt a weapon meant for the military, while the AR-15 is a favorite sport weapon for people of any age.
I also have one that is this version, it's in a hunting version that my 8-year-old daughter uses to go hunting with.
Support it or not, the AR-15 is the hottest selling rifle in the country, but it doesn't stop some in Washington from trying to get it pulled from the shelves.
You don't need an AR-15. It's harder to aim, it's harder to use, and in fact, you don't need 30 rounds to protect yourself. Buy a shotgun.
The vice president's remarks only helped fuel the negative PR campaign, one many law enforcement professionals say paints a useful weapon in a negative light.
We use AR-15 like we do any other tool.
Clay County Sheriff Kenny Lemons says each of his patrol vehicles is equipped with an AR-15, but he sees just as much use for civilians.
I think the public perceives it simply as a assault weapon that's used for nothing more than military and law enforcement purposes, when in fact it couldn't be further from the truth.
Remember this guy with the young daughter who shoots the AR-15? He's not some backwoods gun-crazy advocate. He's a captain with the Wichita County Sheriff's Office.
This gun does not have any kick. Last year she shot with a bolt action 223, which was still too big for her, but it was a bolt action style 223 Savage 110 Predator. This one's a lighter version. She can handle the gun. She can maneuver it when it's set up for her.
A first look at the ammunition for the AR-15, usually a .223 round, might give the same impression as the weapon itself. Big and dangerous, especially when stacked up next to a .45 caliber round. But once again, the looks can be deceiving.
If you look at the damage done, the ballistics done, the .40 caliber or .45 caliber pistol is going to do just as much or more damage than this .223.
The .45 is also the choice round carried by Clay County sheriffs in their sidearm, and Lemons says he chose it for a reason.
It's a bigger bullet. It causes more damage to whatever you're trying to stop, and then the fight's over.
We wanted to get a feel for just what these weapons are capable of, so we took an AR-15 used by civilians for hunting and one used by the Wichita County Sheriff's Office out here to the range. The holes made by both AR-15s were understandably the same, both shooting the .223 round. But we wanted to know how the holes would look compared to ones caused by larger caliber pistol rounds. We shot .40 caliber rounds from an MP5 and Captain Elliott's sidearm. This time, the difference was clear. It's easy to see, it's just a bigger hole.
Bigger hole, it's a lot bigger.
Still, the AR-15 and similar weapons, with their large magazines and long range, have been used in many high-profile incidents, including the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting, a shooting in Portland, Oregon, and Newtown, Connecticut, where Adam Lanza shot his way through a locked glass door with a Bushmaster XM15.
But as far as damage, a pistol is going to do just as much or more damage at close range than this weapon would inside a schoolroom.
Both Sheriff Lemons and Captain Elliott say it's much more about the person behind the gun than the weapon's size or the bullet in the chamber.
That weapon is no more a bad weapon than any other weapon. It's not the weapon that does the bad thing. It's the person that has the weapon.
Jack Lamson, News Channel 6.
Well, that's just a few of the stories you saw only on 6. There are several other stories we aired right here throughout the month of May. They include dry drowning, smart farms, even a special look at News Channel 6 as we celebrate 60 years. If you'd like to take a look at those, all you have to do is head to our website, newschannel6now.com. Once you're there, just click on the Only on 6 tab. We want to say thanks for joining us, Texhoma. As always, we'll see you back here next Sunday morning for another look inside Texhoma.